She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
Welcome to She Who Persisted, the Nasty Podcast. This is Elizabeth, and I am here with a special guest, our friend Amy Dreyer.
Woo, woo.
So instead of the second half to the interview with historian Mar Hicks, because there is so much going on in the world of the fight against the patriarchy, I thought it might be a good idea to sit down and talk about what is going on with another great feminist, Amy Dreyer. So let's get started. There's a lot to talk about between creepy politicians, the 2020 presidential race in the United States, and and the new menstruation equality legislation that is being proposed, which is kind of exciting. So what do you want to talk about today? What's your top fight against the patriarchy that's going on in your life today?
It's not global, but
it's not global.
It's not global. We can shift into global. I mean, the United States, I'm always so disappointed in how ready and willing our white women are to jump to the defense of white men, and the whole Joe Biden thing that's going on right now, and the amount of energy that women are putting into villainizing other women, right?
Honestly, I've seen so many YouTube videos of Joe Biden being a creeper that I can't even believe that anybody would come to his defense. I mean, I don't think he's doing it intentionally, but that's the whole point, right? I mean, patriarchy is all about the microaggressive, the things that keep us down without anybody meaning, quote unquote, meaning to do it. But it's that whole thing where I didn't mean to make you feel creeped out. I didn't mean, my interpretation of it was totally different from yours. And so your interpretation of feeling creeped out is invalid. I'm tired of that.
Yeah, the gaslighting. It's just, and if all of these women who I saw them meekly sort of raise a finger ever maybe to defend Hillary Clinton, but if they put as much time and energy and mental tricks into defending Hillary as they did Joe Biden, we'd be living in a different world right now. I mean, it's just they're so willing to jump in and say, well, that woman, why did she do that? Or why didn't she speak up at the time? Or why, and of course, Joe Biden is just he's a straw man. He's a stand-in for all of the other men who do this on a, totally consistent basis. And I was kind of thinking we're so willing, so many people on the left are willing to buy into this understanding about climate change, right? And how it's this entire system of small and large acts that add up every day. And, we all have complicity in it. And, it's this sort of huge system where so many multiple things fit together to create this overall eco oppression, right? And women on the left are so willing to buy into that. And they're oh no, I don't use Ziploc snack bags anymore because the climate, right? But they're not willing to be oh, well, it's not okay for my creepy uncle to hug my 10-year-old.
Well, and you do get women who are saying look, it's inappropriate. Young girls should be able to have control over their own bodies, young girls and young boys, and whatever, young people should be able to have control over their own bodies and be able to say I don't want to kiss my weird creepy aunt or my weird creepy uncle. I want to have control over my body. But when we come to things like this with Joe Biden, and honestly, Justin Fairfax and Virginia too, that we're not willing to say look, just because you didn't think it was okay to do it doesn't mean that it was okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much women are so willing to be well, she should have taken personal responsibility in the moment.
Yeah.
And corrected it, So that's just what's on my mind. So in reading up for this podcast, I did come across a ton of other things, and but that was just that's the du jour right now. When you log into Facebook, is all of these white women talking about the sanctity of Joe Biden and preserving his privilege.
I mean, do you think it's because we have this media assumption because of the polling data, supposedly, that Joe Biden's the only person who can beat Trump?
Yeah. Well, it's all based in fear, right? Anytime a woman tells another woman she's not good enough or she did it wrong or like steps in to defend the oppressor, right? It's based on these micro fears of, not confronting what's happened to them in their lives. But yeah, also on this larger scale, like we have to like stand together and defend Joe Biden, like don't eat our own. That's such a big criticism you always hear whenever you call out, some guy who's doing this thing. It's like, don't eat our own. But that was not so much given to Hillary Clinton.
Well, yeah, I mean, the don't eat our own
Harris.
only works apparently when it's like Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders.
Right. Or Pete Buttigieg or Beto or, the 4 white bees.
I'm real tired of people saying that Beto O'Rourke, who lost his election, is somehow going to be the savior of the Democratic Party. I'm so tired of that.
Yeah. No, I just put up a graphic that detailed the 4 white bees and all of their electoral losses compared to the women in the race who literally never lost an election.
Yeah.
And the common take is, but can a woman win?
It's seriously so exhausting.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, we on She Persisted are all about like fighting the good fight and like really like keeping up and persisting against patriarchy. But at some point, it's so exhausting.
Yeah.
And I just want to eat a sheet cake.
Sheet caking, full on sheet caking, and we're not even in 2020 yet.
I know.
Yeah.
So what else did you research in preparing for today?
Yeah, so I realized, since leaving DC, where your world it's this incredible micro focus inside the Beltway, right, in this tiny little swath of the United States. But on the other hand, you're so much more globally engaged with political politics. And, it's been a while since I felt really globally engaged. So I kind of went back through and went to some of the bigger think tanks that I'm aware of around women's rights and read, the latest annual report on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, right? Like what they're putting about. I went to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, Council on Foreign Relations, to try and just get myself back into some sort of I do my duty and listen to NPR every day. So there's that. But I kind of wanted maybe like a little bit, I've heard, and obviously we all hear, it's like kind of 2 extremes when you hear about women in the world, right? Like you hear about Iceland that's mandated gender equity and their female prime minister. And you hear about kind of these great developments for women in the white European Western world about, women in leadership and electoral politics. And obviously the United States had the big blue wave that was really the big blue women's wave. And then the rest of the world, all you kind of hear about is like women as refugees, right? As like victimized women escaping terrible conditions. And obviously, any feminist can extrapolate what happens to women as their conditions destabilize, right?
Sure.
But also there is, post Me Too, post Global Women's March, the gains in the developing world are also significant, right? Like we're closing the education gap for women. We're in some ways addressing violence against women, but like even starting to collect statistics where we never had before. So I was saddened yet encouraged.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating to see how far we have to go, but it's great to see how far we have already come, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I started learning about microfinance in the mid 90s, with the Grauman Bank. And, kind of, I remember reading about that as a high schooler, and I actually volunteered. So I'm from this small rural town, and I actually volunteered with this guy who was doing local work, like micro work with the Grauman Bank program. And I volunteered with him for a few months, just kind of like doing admin for him or whatever. But it was the first time I'd heard about microfinance. And I remember even way back when, and I was a dumb 16-year-old kid who had some opinions about things, and most of them weren't good opinions about things. But even then being like, this is revolutionary. Like, this is going to, if it takes off, this could really change things up. And lo and behold, yes, the concept of microfinance really has changed things. And that's something that I did run into in reading up on what's going on with women in the world. Is microfinance has definitely been a cataclysmic change in the status of women.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when you think about, where the United States was in the 60s and 70s, where women couldn't get a loan or sign for a bank loan all on their own at all, they had no independent money, to where we are today. I mean, think about how much these loans mean for these women to be able to have their own businesses, to be able to support their villages, to support their communities, and that also leads to the ability for their children to go to school, their girls to go to school, which is super important. I mean, we know based on data that has been collected over longitudinal data, that the more education a woman has in developing countries, the better her chances are at progressing and being, not being a child bride, not being in positions of oppression.
Right. Absolutely. And it's just, and to kind of pull that out further, right, the status of women and girls is a leading indicator for the status of the country on a macro scale, right? Like if women and girls are safe from violence, it really is a bellwether, and it talks so much about whether the country as a whole is how safe it is from violence, how stable the democracy is. And we could probably talk about how much that interacts. Like, is that an indicator that's completely divorced from its result? Or is it an indicator that drives the result?
Yeah. No,
I tend to think it drives the result.
No, it's a good question. And obviously we're not going to come up with the answer to it here. But I mean, I think that the more that we can support those kind of initiatives, and the more that we can think globally in that way, not like white savior complex, like white savior Barbie, like that kind of stuff, but really thinking about the impact that our money and our support and our work generally has on women and girls in other countries, and how that's really leading the way and helping with the development of those communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the two kind of microfinance entrance points I've seen available to the broader population in the Western world are buy someone a goat. Right. Those are really popular programs and important programs. And then the other one I've seen kind of coming up and I've participated in and I really like is like the Kiva style program. Right. So that is, it's kind of the evolution of the Sally Struthers adopt a child, plea from the 80s. Right. But it's the 21st century way. Kiva is this platform where you kind of go on and it profiles, Kiva is doing work throughout the world, and it profiles women in developing countries who, kind of make their case for, hey, you person, lend me X money. Right. And so, you go in, and Anush in Armenia is trying to raise $2,500 for, and this is what I've kind of seen. It's these women running these little bodegas, right? These little kind of, defeating food oasis issues in the developing world. Are we supposed to use developing world?
I am not sure what the term is anymore. I feel like developing world is not correct.
Yeah, no.
Because it implies that they are in a stage of development that is behind us. And I feel like that's really like colonial language for how to talk about the developing world, to talk about other countries.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely know we're not supposed to use third world, because first, second, and third world is just bullshit. But developing world also, I think, is wrong. And I'm sure there's a better way to say that. And I am not sure what that is. So lovely listeners, educate us. Let us know. I mean, I'm not telling you to do our work for us, but there's so much on the internet to point us in the direction of what the best way to talk about, countries that are struggling, people who are struggling.
Yeah. If Christine Lagarde were on this podcast, it'd be so much better.
I know. I know.
Yeah. So anyway, you kind of, as a lender, right? And I even like, women in the Western world or in the privileged world, we need ways to access meaningful opportunities, right, to lift up our sisters around the world. And so, it is kind of cool to be considered